Welcome to Mad Men, where we gather in the creative lounge, discuss and analyze each episode of the AMC series Mad Men, which aired between 2007 and 2015. One of us is a first-time watcher of the show. One of us went through it just once back when it was airing. And then there's me, who currently has no sympathies or ties with the Soviet Union. I'm John Negroni, and Will Ashton, are you all right? You're jiggling your keys all funny, and Will, you're ripping your shirt off.
John, I got a 45-minute conversation with some people from the Bureau. Do you have any idea what that was about?
They might be checking in because they're concerned that Mike Overholtz is missing yet another week of Mad Men. Clearly he wouldn't want to, but he told me that his dad is in town. He's taking him out to dinner at some bunny-themed restaurant. Hope it tastes good.
I do know, I mean, you might be fibbing a little bit, but he is at a concert, fittingly enough, right now. I know it's not the Beatles or Ringo or Paul. I hope not to date this episode too much, but I forget which band he's seeing right now.
He said band Camino, I think it was.
Camino. Is that a good
so
band
not exactly
or a bad
the Beatles.
Band?
What?
Are they on par with the Beatles?
No. But I don't think they're trying to be. We can be nice.
Right. What kind of music is it? I generally don't know anything. I'm not like teasing or anything. I don't know anything about this band.
Camino, they're kind of like alternative pop, I want to say, like ish. I'm trying to think because I have a bunch of their music on my Spotify and all that stuff. But indie rock, electro pop is kind of their. Yeah.
If I told my hypothetical daughter that I got us 2 tickets for this band, how would she react?
I mean, assuming okay, so we're starting with you have a daughter. What's the age?
I said a hypothetical daughter. Yes. I don't know. Let's say I don't know, 10.
10 years old. I think she'd be like, what?
Okay.
It's not going to have the same reaction. I think if you wanted to have a reaction, it was funny because in the commentaries, Weiner said that if for Kieran Shipka, they had to tell her that it was Justin Bieber. Like, think Justin Bieber instead of the Beatles.
I figured it was going to be either that or like the Jonas Brothers or something.
Right, exactly.
Or Miley Cyrus, I guess I would have been around the same time.
But yeah, funny too that this is such a Beatles-themed episode of Mad Men, just because the first Lindsay Ellis video to come out in years, I think, is about the Beatles. And so I was a little bit like, wow, it's Beatlemania on the internet this week between this podcast and obviously a much more popular and well-known YouTube channel, but still.
I was wondering, like you hear the beats of what song is it from Please Please Me? Who do you think you are? It's something. It's a question, right?
So do you want to know a secret?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, do you want to know a secret?
Yeah, that's what ends this episode. But
right,
it's like the cover of it,
right? And they start playing like the opening notes for it, and as I was listening, I was like, "Man, did they go all?" I know like Mad Men was getting big, and like AMC was like their big darling, but I was like, did they pay Beatles royalty money for this end credit song? And then obviously they
tried. Yeah, Weiner really tried. He really wanted to play Do You Want to Know a Secret at the end, but no. He said he kept trying to get in touch with the people who have the rights, and it just didn't work out.
Was that Michael Jackson at this point?
What?
Didn't Michael Jackson own the rights to the Beatles for a little bit?
No, this is 2010. No, I think this is past all that stuff. Michael Jackson was dead at this point.
Okay, so he was... Well, I didn't know if his estate still owned it or how that went at that point.
No, at this point, I mean, Beatles Rock Band has come out. Like, it's starting to become more and more proliferated. I don't know the particulars, but I'm pretty sure it was like a whole company, and yeah.
Yeah, but in any case, because this wasn't a cheap episode, like you said, you have to pay, a lot of money for an average episode of Mad Men, I assume, but also, the licensing rights for Playboy and all that. And I'm like, if they also, paid the rights to play not even like, like the most prominent Beatles song, but just a Beatles song in general, I was going to be...
Great Beatles song, too. One of my faves.
I was going to be blown away. But they not only played a cover, but an instrumental cover of the song. So I was like, that sounds about right.
I forget the name of the artist, too. I think I wrote it down somewhere. But yeah, anyway, so we're talking about Hands and Knees. This is the 10th episode of season 4. This is the 49th episode overall of Mad Men. It aired on September 26, 2010. It was directed by the late and great Lynn Shelton. Lynn Shelton passed away, I think it was in 2020, right? Cancer. And this was her only directing credit on Mad Men.
Yeah. That was really, I didn't realize that she had directed. I know she did some TV, but I didn't realize that she directed an episode of Mad Men, and my heart sank a little bit when I saw her credit. It was just like, I was reminded once more that she's not around. Although I have to say, not to call him on the spot, but Matt Zoller Seitz in his chapter in Mad Men Carousel, he says the right name, but he attributes her the rat catcher, which is Lynn Ramsey, who is, thankfully still with us. Great director, but different director, different Lynn. This is the director of was it Your Sister's Sister and Hump
Day. She directed a lot of TV. She directed episodes of New Girl. I think Mad Men was the first thing she directed on the TV side, but she did New Girl, she did Mindy Project, Fresh Off the Boat, Master of None.
Glow, I believe.
I think she might have done one episode of Shameless, a few episodes of Love, Santa Clarita Diet, Dickinson, Morning Show. And I think the last thing she did was A Little Fires Everywhere, the one that was based on the book that Reese Witherspoon's book club basically gets all the movie rights for. Celeste Ng, I think, was the author of that.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't too familiar with her TV work. I'll admit, I was more familiar with her film work, and
forgot she did Casual too. She did at least one episode, if not two, of Casual. Which I know you like that show.
It's really fascinating to me to see her direct an episode of Mad Men, because she was one of the, I mean, maybe not one of the core, but she was pretty well indebted into the mumblecore movement.
Mumblecore, yeah, the core of mumblecore up there with Swanberg. She was in the Mark Maron orbit. I think she even did Glow too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I did say that. Maybe you didn't hear me, but yeah, I did mention Glow, and I know she directed also some of his specials later because they were partners.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, yeah, it was a pretty sudden and grave loss, and I feel like she was really coming into her own as a director in many respects as at the end of her life, unfortunately. And yeah, it was. I'm always just disheartened to remember, because I also knew a number of people from school who actually were connected to Lynn Ramsey, Lynn Shelton, and they had nothing but great things to say about her. So it was just really sad. But like I said, I think it's really fascinating to have her, such a modern, filmmaker of the 2000s, direct this period piece. And yeah, it was not a filmmaker I expected to see on the roster, but one that I was happy and grief-stricken to see.
Yeah, because it brought me back. It brought me back to when I think Mark Maron did something, because they were together at the time when she died. I remember he did something on his podcast. It was just tear-inducing.
He did an episode that Monday. I think she died on a Friday, and he did an episode that Monday, and it was a re-airing of the first episode they had together, which he usually does when a famous guest dies. He usually takes their episode off the paywall, but he does a new intro, and he did one only days after she died. And it's really hard to listen to. But yeah, with all that said,
hands and knees.
I thought this was
well, hold on. Let me set you up. Don't jump into the pool quite yet. You just ate. Ratings wise, this thing dipped a little bit from last week, from 229. And I looked a little bit at the critical reviews at the time. There were some folks who were kind of saying that it took, I think one of the main reasons season 4 was divisive for some people at this point. I know we've talked about it throughout the season of some of the critical reactions, but I think at this point in the season, some critics were like, all right, well, what's this whole season about, really? If you really boil it down to what's the plot stuff, obviously the story of everything, Dawn's descent and all that is pretty clear. But in terms of SCDP, where is this all building to? What's the climax of this going to be? People were feeling like we didn't have, a shut the door, have the seat moment coming. There wasn't much setup for something like Nixon versus Kennedy, etc. So I think this was the episode where people started to look at okay, so now we're starting to see what's going to happen here, because so many pivotal, momentous things start to come into play with a lot of characters, and it's a faster paced episode for sure. This one's co-written by not just Matthew Weiner, but also Jonathan Abrahams, his second and out of 2 episodes he wrote for Mad Men. First one was The Good News. As usual, I listened to the commentaries for this one, including the one with Matthew Weiner, who did his with David Carbonara, the composer of the show, which was lovely because I love it when those two are together because Carbonara and Weiner just seem like real friends. So they just kind of chit chat. It's nice to listen to, very pleasant. And Christina Hendricks and Vincent Kartheiser did the other commentary, which was fantastic as well. A lot of great tidbits in their discussion of the episode. So then I'll turn to you, Will, because I'm curious what you think about this episode and what you think this episode ultimately is about thematically, at least as you see it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really strong in the fourth season. I thought this episode was pretty good. I don't think it's maybe up to snuff with some of the episodes that we've gotten so far in season 4, but I really did like it all the same. I mean, there's a distinction that Mad Men Carousel makes. It's not attributed to Matt Zoller Seitz, but it's in the book. And he said that there are theme episodes and episodes with themes. And this is in the former as opposed to the latter category. It's like a very writer friendly sort of like archetypal, like this is what our episode is about sort of thing in a way that, in a lesser show, I think could feel a little clunky or maybe feel a little rigid. And even in some of the earlier seasons of Mad Men, I think when they tried to do like a theme episode like this one, they can be a little less graceful. I think it's a testament though to how confident and comfortable Mad Men has been that even with that in mind, that this does flow pretty well. And I think it doesn't feel as like blocky or as, written as it were, as it could have been otherwise. But to answer your initial question or one of your earlier questions, as far as what the themes are, there is this kind of idea of like open and closed doors, like the appearances and people, kind of keeping secrets and feeling this kind of need to like, feel, in order to feel like themselves, they and succeed, they have to withhold or hide things of themselves. And it's one of those things where everyone in this episode is miserable for a different reason or another, whether it's Dawn going through several panic attacks and getting hot and bothered in all the wrong ways because the government might be on his tail about his false identity. There's Roger being distraught because a woman that's on his wife is pregnant, and also Lucky Strikes is looking to lead the company. You got Pete having to lose his big agency that he's been client that he's been putting forward for the past few years as someone who's been a little bit more stable and level-headed because of his higher ups and no fault of his own. And obviously Joan, as I mentioned, is having to deal with getting an abortion, I believe at least her second or third at this point. And yeah, and I'm trying to think. Lane is also caught between, trying to emigrate into America and start a new relationship with this Playboy bunny who happens to be a black woman, and his English patriarchal figure, in this case his father, very aggressively insisting that he clean up his affairs and get his home sorted. So yeah, everyone except for, I guess, for Bert, and we don't really see Peggy much, so I'm hoping she's doing okay. Everyone besides those two are not doing great in this episode, unfortunately.
Peggy doesn't have any secrets, right? That's what Yeah, so no, you captured it really well. This is, as Weiner himself would put it, this is an episode all about secrets. You covered them pretty deftly there. I think the only one that's a little bit of a stretch in terms of a character kind of hiding something would be Lane to an extent, because Lane's kind of hiding something. He's hiding his relationship and everything, but he's also he's punished kind of in this episode for starting to share that or trying to share that with his father. It's almost like the show sort of demonstrating where that fear of kind of exposing yourself or exposing a secret kind of comes from, and, exposing those appearances, kind of like you were saying. Everything else, though, I mean, the secret affair between Roger and Joan kind of having its big consequence. And I think the consequence of Dawn's secret and how that really spills out onto Pete's life. Pete has to absorb all of the consequences, pretty much, of this situation that Don has put himself in, right? And also Betty is a bit of a victim of that in this episode too, and ends up having to kind of stick up and defend this person that she hates, who has said that she wants to die, but ultimately kind of, goes to bat for him and helps him out. So yeah, this is one of the, and she keeps a secret from Henry, right? And there's also the idea of like when you don't want to burden somebody with a secret, the way that Pete doesn't want to tell Trudy what he knows or what's going on. But then also Pete doesn't want to be burdened by the secret that now he knows that Don is, with Faye. And then, of course, the huge monumental secret being exposed of Don confessing to Faye, who he really is. And the consequence of that seems to be that now he is starting to feel a little bit of like, what have I done, in terms of telling Faye that, and some regret of exposing that. Because sometimes it feels great when you unload something like that, when you're honest about something like that. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you're like, things have gotten more complicated. The burden of it is starting to cripple me a little bit in terms of, what can I do next? And now this person sees me. And if I had to pinpoint something about this episode I do really like, because it's not the best episode of Mad Men for sure. It's plot heavy, It doesn't have as much fun and quirkiness as some of the other episodes this season. But what I do really like about it is it's a great showcase for the actors themselves. And it kind of shows you that Mad Men actors are just different from a lot of the other primetime shows of this era, especially. They're just so freaking vulnerable. They're not afraid to be unlikable, especially with Roger. But yeah, the boldness of this episode really puts me for a loop, honestly. And John Slattery himself, by the way, who plays Roger, I think he put himself forward under consideration for an Emmy for Best Supporting Actor in a Drama, which I think he kind of deserves. I mean, he's killing it in this episode. It's heartbreaking what happens, but a lot of subplots here. This is one of those episodes where there's a lot of stuff going on. What was the weakest for you? Maybe we can start there.
I don't know if any of them stand out to me as the weakest. I feel like
the one you're least interested in.
I mean, I feel like we don't really dive all that deep into Pete's story. I mean, like, obviously his is a little bit more of a milder dilemma compared to everyone else, I guess. But it is interesting because Pete has been primarily in the background for the last few episodes, quite literally in the most recent one.
He's prior to thriving this season. He's in his element.
Sure. But it just
he's
like
kind of showing
really,
that like he's showing them that he always deserved to have the head of accounts job all along, because when he kind of rises to the occasion.
Yeah, he's just been actually working, seems for most of the season, which ironically means that we don't really see a lot of his character. But yeah, we do get to spend a good bit of time with him. We see Trudy again, who is increasingly more and more pregnant, as pregnant women tend to be, closer to their due date. And yeah, I mean, he has kind of a heart-to-heart with her in some respects. Seemed like their relationship is far more healthy than we've seen it before, which is good for many reasons. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if we really get to dive too much into his noodle a little bit. It's just kind of more of a like, he asserts himself. He's basically in the right, but he also has to kind of suck the lemon a little bit and, put on a brave face and lose his account, and also kind of get a tongue lashing from inordinately feisty and vulnerable, as you would say, Roger.
It's definitely a showcase for how strong Pete is. Pete is a strong person. The way he kind of just takes all that, and ultimately it is coming from a place of self-preservation, right? Because he doesn't want the agency to go down because he goes down. But also, I think that his discipline, his commitment to that is really, it's wild to see from a character who we see throw temper tantrums so many times and act like a child. But this is the episode where I think that it's showing us that Pete is growing up a bit. And now Roger's the one who's kind of regressing to childlike behavior, right? Projecting and yelling at Pete the things that he's really meaning for himself, that he just has no other way to let that loose because he doesn't go to therapy, right? I think with Pete, though, when I first watched this episode, I remember taking it so differently than I do now. I think when I first watched it, I was surprised to an extent of like, wow, this is the guy who in season 1 was going to use this secret of Dawn's against him to rise up and do all this stuff to take his job. And now he's kind of, when I first watched it, I was like, and now he's kind of like, he likes Dawn. He's Dawn's friend. He's doing this for Dawn. I don't know why I read it that way. I was so weirdly optimistic. Right. And I think I just my media literacy was still, a little plaything back when I was 20. But now I definitely can watch this and really see the complexity of Pete's emotion here, his conflict of like, this isn't my problem. Like, and also the mental gymnastics he's going through. He doesn't care about Dawn necessarily. He cares about the survival of the agency, and it makes plenty of sense. And for a character who you hate to root for, I think that it's more Pete than we've gotten a lot of this season. You're right. He's been in the background. It's nice to have him kind of come to the forefront, but I dare say he actually, we've said it before in this season, he seems to just be the most stable, kind of reliable person at this agency at the moment, especially with like Lane getting his ass kicked by his dad. And I shouldn't say that's pretty messed up, but like, yeah, I mean, Don getting his ass kicked by Duck, and Pete's just kind of like, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, Pete is not someone I tend to want to stick up for, but he's doing the dang work of this season. So, you gotta give props where they're due sometimes.
And Don doesn't even appreciate it, really. I mean, he kind of, like, he's so like condescending and like self-centered about it. He's like, do it, take care of it. Like he's not really acknowledging Pete's sort of like, I like built this account from nothing, and it's such a contrast to Roger, who like Roger has Lucky Strike, but it's like Lee Gardner says, he inherited it, and Pete's the one who like, grinded it out, hustled, like really like made something, and references the fact that he built this account when Don ditched him in California and, treated him like shit then. He's treating Pete like shit now. But ultimately, Pete still respects Don because he knows that Don's kind of the face of this agency.
Yeah, I understand why they don't do this, but I was kind of curious to briefly pick your brain about this. Do you think it's interesting that Don and Pete don't go to Bert to discuss this at all, since Bert also knows that Don isn't Don?
Well, I think that with Don, the fewer people he talks to, the better. I think that he has to talk to Pete because, well, Pete's the account man. Bert, right. I don't think Bert's connections and everything don't really extend to the government as far as we know in the show, at least not to that extent. I mean, a little bit, but I think that ultimately, like, this is something that I think Bert is too old to handle. I think that this is something that the guy doesn't even have an office. And I think that it's one of those things where Don does not trust people with this information very easily. And yeah, Bert knows, but I just think that he wants to keep it contained as much as possible.
And Bert's also grieving, I suppose, the loss of
grieving Ida.
Yeah.
He's a little persnickety in that partners meeting. But no, you're right. I think that, I think that also he might understand that this is the kind of thing that he definitely doesn't want Roger to know. And if he talks to Bert about it, Roger could get involved. So yeah, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I figured that's why they don't discuss. Like I said, it's not like I'm shocked they didn't. It was just one of those things where I'm like, they could technically kind of rope him in if they wanted to. Though I considering how packed this episode is, I didn't think that was really an avenue they were able or willing to explore. But yeah, I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of touched on it already, but I think the Lane stuff here is the weakest for me. I think that it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb in this episode to me. And I don't know if you agree or not. I mean, I like the moments. Like, I like, obviously, getting to know more about Lane's backstory. His dad is played by W. Morgan Shepherd, and you get a better sense of why Lane is the way he is. You have a fun cameo by Nattari Naughton, who was one of the performers in 3LW. I don't know if you remember that band from the 2000s, Will. I guess not really your music, I guess, but
No, wait, I'm sorry, what was the band's name?
3LW.
No, yeah, it wasn't about that.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it too is like if you watch, I know you didn't, but like if you watch things like Nickelodeon and stuff, I think like 3LW like was part of that stuff. Maybe I could be combining things, but anyway, so it's cringy. It's also I don't love it. I just Lane. I like Lane. I like that he's trying to like ingratiate himself more with America, but also he's in conflict with not seeing his son, and it's heartbreaking with like the Mickey especially. I hate that moment where he walks out of the office with the Mickey and the balloons, and then it's just his dad, and like he's the son in that scenario, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, I can see why you thought it was the weakest plot point. For me, I was just kind of happy to see Lane again, because I feel like if there's any main character that this season has not really known exactly what to do with, it is probably Lane. He has kind of not really factored as much into a plot, and not like in the same way that Pete's kind of been delegated to the background. It's just kind of just like Lane's also here, and like I think there was that episode where it was a season, right, where Lane and Dawn like get drunk and go New Year's charading, right? That was a season? Am I not mistaken?
Wait, what? Can you say it again?
Yeah, sorry. The episode where Dawn and Lane get drunk and they're going to see the movie and they're getting steak and Mara. That was this season, right?
Yeah. That was the New Year's episode. So I think that was episode 2 or 3. Okay. 3. The good news. The other Jonathan Abrams episode. So
yeah. So he must like Lane.
Yeah, but they're like, well, we need this Jonathan Abrams guy. He knows Lane and Lane knows him.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I get what you're saying. It doesn't, like I said, I mean, that kind of feels maybe less graceful in its incorporation than the way that's handled elsewhere, or the plots are handled elsewhere. I was generally taken aback by Lane's dad beating the shit out of his son. I think that was a pretty amazing performance on his part, going from like this gentile, like old man to a genuinely terrifying figure. Because there is like some inherent like hostility, but it's like, oh, is this like a British, manner sort of thing? Because there is inherent tension, like I said, but then like, yeah, that scene happens. It's like, oh, I get it. Like, man.
Yeah. There's so much to try to pick at with the Lane stuff kind of under the surface. I mean, ultimately, it doesn't really, like, it's hard to tell where it's all going. Ultimately, it ends with him succumbing to his father's wishes, going back to England, presumably to resolve things with his marriage. But what do you predict is going to happen with that? Do you think he's going to try to pick up his marriage, but then does that mean he doesn't come back? Do you think he's going to end his marriage? Where are you at with this?
I would have to assume that he's closing all ties with Britain. I mean, he seems pretty happy to be living in America. He's forming a new relationship. I don't think he necessarily wants to discontinue his relationship with his family and kids. Obviously, we see him with the old-fashioned Mickey Mouse doll earlier in the episode, but if push comes to shove, he's not going back to Britain. I don't think. It doesn't seem like he is interested in rekindling that relationship. So I think he's getting his affairs in order to go back to America.
There you go. Yeah, we'll see if that plays out as it does. And it's a weird, again, it's a weird moment of the episode, but I appreciate it. I think it needed to be somewhere in the season. And I think if it's going to be here, it's already a pretty fast-paced episode, so you might as well have an ass-kicking in the middle of it. Yeah,
I do agree that this episode is a little lacking in the comedy department, but I do think it's funny when Lane's just like, I'm going to take a sabbatical. Bye, everybody. And then everyone just is like...
Everyone's like, what? Okay. there are a couple of good jokes, but they're jokes that, like, in the context of the episode, like, it doesn't register for anybody. Like, one of them is... when Don just straight up says to Faye Miller, like, you're not a real doctor. It's just so mean. Man. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of, okay, it's not true, but it's like, he's just being a jerk. There is an F-bomb in this episode. Only the second time the F word is used in Mad Men. And the first time was in season 1. I think the very first episode the pilot, when Pete says, fuck you to Don. And this one, it's Roger saying it to Pete. And it is fascinating because you got it. Because they even mentioned, Matthew Weiner mentions this in the commentary. It's like, it's because this is a network show, but otherwise, or cable show, I guess. But people were seeing the F-bomb all the time in these offices and still do. Like, it's not.
Sure.
It's just kind of weird, like when it does get pulled out, because it almost breaks the immersion a little bit of like, well, if you're going to use it, you're going to remind us that your show kind of sanitizes something. I'm just saying.
I'm assuming this is under the same kind of regulations as like Breaking Bad. I think they were allowed to use like one F-bomb per season. I think that might still be the case for AMC shows, or at least for Better Call Saul. I think they had a similar sort of deal. But as far as Mad Men's concerned, yeah, I get what you're saying, where it's like, it doesn't really bother me. I know the show was initially supposed to be for HBO, and I think it was going to be obviously more adult, probably have more nudity, more language, as you were mentioning. But I think having it be kind of chaste and, being network or cable network, at least friendly, helps with like you said, the immersion, the old fashioned, I know that the 60s weren't necessarily about like code and of that era, but I think people kind of associate with something a little bit more clean edge and whatnot. And I think having Roger kind of throw that F-bomb feels purposeful here, in the sense that you really feel like this guy is losing it, and that this guy is just like not doing well and clearly cracking under pressure. And I didn't take into account that it was a reverse of the previous F-bomb, so that's a fun little bit of trivia. But yeah, I found it to be effective, and it genuinely took me aback when
it took Bert aback. Bert was like, apologize.
Right. Bert is just like, what is going on? Like, he just thought it was going to be a normal meeting, and everyone's just like angry.
You said it. He's still grieving. He's trying to just get this over with so he can go back to crying. And this is the first episode of season 4 that Elizabeth Moss, Peggy Olson, does not appear in the whole episode. We miss her. Come back, Peggy. We miss you. Very sad.
I mean, considering how tense and edgy everyone is in this episode, I'm going to hope that's for the best. Like, she's living her best life right now. So, I mean, she seemed pretty happy at the end of the previous episode. So, I hope all's going well for Peggy.
Yeah, she was kind of triumphant in her sort of girl bossing that Abe dude. Now, the other thing, Beatles. We've touched on the Beatles already. One of the first shots, not shots, but one of the early scenes in the episode. The first shot is actually really fun, where we see that like duck dipping thing again. That was from a few episodes ago, and I love that shot of like Roger just sitting there staring at it and kind of drilling in that, because besides Lucky Strike, this man does nothing at this agency. But anyway, very little at this agency, we should say. He does some stuff. But the Beatles tickets that Don gets for Sally is such a fun moment. It's very wholesome. I really like it. I like how Betty gets into it. She's like, oh goodness. Like it's like a little bit leave it to Beaver, isn't it? Like Don's expression, Sally's like earnest reaction. And I'm like, oh cool. We're going to go to Shea Stadium too. Can we come? That's how I felt.
Yeah, I figured we weren't going to get a scene in Shea Stadium, though. There was a part of me, when we have that last shot of Don, not to jump way too ahead, but like Don looks at the tickets, then looks at Megan in a way that he hasn't seen before, and it's just like putting 2 to 2 together. Maybe like Megan's right for her. Maybe Megan should be going to the concert, whatever. I was really hoping they do a smash cut, and it's just Don and Bert sitting in Shea Park, going to the concert, just being like, can you tell me about these insect band that you're taking me to?
I mean, it's funny, the British stuff you were talking about, the British invasion, the Beatles stuff, and the Lane Price stuff. I mean, you could kind of throw that into a stew. But so that's interesting. So your read of that final shot, not to jump all the way to the end here, but your read of that when he kind of looks at Megan is kind of this feeling of like, she should be going to this concert with Sally instead of me.
No, I just think that he is thinking, oh, okay, maybe Megan, I've kind of taken her for granted. Maybe there's something here. Because this whole season, he's been, I don't want to say on the prowl, because that sounds a little coarse, but he's been, obviously looking around in and out of the agency, kind of looking for maybe not a replacement for Betty, but something to fill that gap in his life. And right now it's with Faye. And you have, like this very vulnerable, open moment where he reveals something that he's only really revealed to two other women in his life. And obviously they're both important, Betty and, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name. In California. No, in California. Anna, may she rest in peace. Yeah, and then, now Faye gets to know, and it's like, all right, last week it wasn't 100% certain where Dawn and Faye were, and now they seem to be stronger, but there is something to Dawn where it's bizarre, but ultimately really fascinating, where, like, he feels a bit like arm's length with her, like even to the point where he's like, don't touch me throughout this episode. Like he clearly needs and wants somebody to be close to, but there is like a kind of motherly instinct with Megan, at least in this episode, that he feels akin to in a way that's like Faye. I don't know if it's that she's trying too hard or it's like she's trying to analyze him too much or whatever, but like Megan, even though she's just doing her job and filling in for Donna's secretary, it seems like, okay, this is actually a woman who's like helping me and doing what I need and looking for what I need, my interests are, as opposed to just like trying to psychoanalyze me. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, will that lead to something later on? I don't know, but that seems to be my read of that moment.
That's mildly interesting. Because I think that there's something to be said about how he is viewing this person after he has this conversation with Faye, and you can tell he's feeling burdened now by the fact that he has really gone to a more vulnerable place with this person. And then it cuts over to, and there's somebody that I don't have the same burden with, and there is something to be said. I mean, his accountant guy from earlier in the episode who apparently thought that Dom was going to commit suicide. That's my read of that, where he's just like, I don't like how this conversation, because Don is like, I got to put my kids in a trust, and his accountant, for all he knows, like Don's been like depressed, and like it seems to be the kind of read there, right? But then he ends it with kind of like, I hope you're stopping that account, like what? The 60s.
This is easily the sweatiest we've seen Don, right? Like he's been through some shit before, but like
Suitcase, my dude is sweaty.
That's true.
Dude had puke on his shirt and Suitcase.
Yeah, that is true. But I'm not even talking like sweaty in like a desperate sort of way. I just mean like literally he is drenched in sweat like this whole episode.
They literally shot, so to pull this off where you can see him start to perspire over the course of a scene, they would literally shoot two scenes, one where he's totally dry and one where he's wet the entire time, and they just edited them together so that it looks like he's becoming sweaty over time. It's awesome. It's just such good practical effect there.
That's cool. And I had to relate because obviously we're recording this in the dead heat of summer, and I feel like I feel the way Dawn looks throughout this episode. Like I just don't deal with the heat. I'm not a California boy like you. I just like when it gets hot like
the heat wave. It was like in the 110s earlier this week.
Oh man, that's even hotter than it's been here.
Oh yeah. It was pretty bad, and our AC has been broken, but it was fixed as of today. Thank the Lord.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out something funny from the episode. So when Roger is going through the Rolodex and he's like talking to his old business contacts, obviously there's a whole thing where like it's sad because like it's been so long since he worked, like it's been so long since he actually did his job that these people are like dead, and he's like trying to get off the phone and everything. But there's kind of this like headcanon theory out there that the person he's talking to, Louise, her husband is named Larry. And so a lot of people have said that that's a reference to Larry and Louise Tate from Bewitched, which was obviously a show that came out in the mid 1960s. And the reason people suspect that is because Larry Tate was like an advertising account manager. So it's just this fun little kind of like, oh, maybe. But in the commentaries, Weiner never confirms or denies that. It's never brought up. At
That's
least unless I missed it. Yeah.
No, that's a fun theory though. I like that.
I like it a lot. It'd be a fun little joke if that was the case. Yeah. Okay. We covered a good bit of stuff, and we I think with the Don thing, I think you probably suspected that he'd get out of this jam, but I guess I'm curious, like, for you, when he's having like his panic attack and he's starting to kind of unravel and everything. What did you ultimately kind of get away from that? Like, did you kind of feel like something more drastic was going to happen? Like he was going to split, like kind of leave town again? Or were you kind of, I don't know, were you feeling a little bit like this is just going to tidy itself up by the end?
I mean, I don't know if this is just one of those things where, because I know we're a little more than midway through the show, I would have been very, very surprised if like Don booked it and then the second half of the show was him like on the run and, you know, being like the fugitive from the government. It just, you know, it would seem kind of weird if we would just be like cutting back to the agency doing typical Mad Men things and you just see Don like running in the forest and who knows what. Yeah, so I figured the whole thing was going to resolve itself in some fashion or another. You know, it didn't seem like a huge mystery that, you know, he was going to press Pete. Pete was going to, you know, push back, but ultimately relent. You know, nothing about that really surprised me. I think it was just kind of more watching it unfold that was kind of the takeaway here. It doesn't seem like, I don't know, like there are some revelations and there are some big surprises in this episode, but it feels like we're kind of setting up things maybe more than we're just like, you know, like firmly like establishing irreparable sort of things. It feels like, all right, we're 3/4 away through the season. We kind of need to plant the seeds for what's going to tidy up this 4th season of Mad Men.
Yeah, because like I can definitely see why Dr. Faye would be the one. I could see why she would tell him to confront his past. She's the one who kind of understands psychologically that this isn't sustainable for him and that the consequences aren't worth it and that he should own up to this and that, you know, get a lawyer, like do something kind of, you know, there was a not anti-Semitic joke in the commentaries, but bordering on where they were kind of like, well, she is Jewish, so she would, you know, think about getting a lawyer. And it's like, oh, dang it. But anti-Semitic jokes aside, I don't get though, Pete kind of being like, oh, why you could do statute of limitations or you try to resolve this. It doesn't totally make sense to me because I get the desperation of it is that he just wants to save this account. I mean, it's $4 million in billings, but at the same time, he's got to understand that even if Don managed to like get scot-free, which is such a big if, I mean, desertion and stuff, like Don's right. Like that's not like going away easily. But and identity theft, all these things, like he would be in court, it would be a big news scandal, it would be all these things, and it would tank the agency. Like people wouldn't do business with them. They'd be like immediately write off Sterling Cooper as like a fraud and all this stuff. Like I just think it's kind of weird that like Pete kind of even goes there, honestly. But I guess he is kind of just in a fleeting moment of desperation, I guess, blurting out a stupid idea because I mean, who among us haven't done that?
The way I took it is that I don't think Pete did anything inherently sort of malicious, but I think he's not dumb. Like, I think there's a small part of him that was like, you know, if we are working with the government, they have to do a background check. This could be a way of clearing Dawn out and I become head partner. Like, I think there's a part of him that kind of recognizes
the part where like, Don, no, because Don literally says to him, was like, you can run the agency without me. And he's like, are you kidding? Like, he doesn't jump at that at all. No.
I don't know. I don't think it's like this part of his brain that he's really thinking out. But I do think, even though this show takes place in 1960, whatever, I think he went forward in time to 2015 and became Sneaky Pete. Do you remember that show, Sneaky Pete?
Yeah.
Was that like Amazon or something?
Was that Amazon? Maybe. I didn't really watch it, but
did you expect me to name drop Sneaky Pete?
It's just something I haven't heard about in so long.
That's why I thought it was going to be so fun.
So random.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay. I did want to touch on the Joan stuff. It's such a big episode for Joan, the abortion, and you kind of already talked about like this is probably, yeah, you're right, probably her third, if not second or third, probably. And it's tough to watch, and you know, especially like I hate that scene where like that doctor is judging them and everything, and like giving Roger a tongue lashing. Although Roger does deserve to be yelled at, because I think that it's so interesting, because part of me wonders, you know, if things between him and Joan, where they stand at this certain point, he obviously like doesn't want this, you know, pregnancy thing to ruin them rekindling something, but he's also not committal at all to it. And it's just such a tell, I think, to Joan that like, yeah, this guy, like, he's just bad news. Like, it would never work. And, you know, it was a one-time thing. Now, I won't say one way or the other, of course, if it's a one-time thing for these two, but
I don't know. I'm kind of sticking to my theory from before, and I don't like to quote in 2024 Louis C.K., but he has like a whole bit where it's like, of course, but maybe. And I feel like everyone this episode is kind of doing that, where, like I said, with Pete, it's kind of like, of course I don't want the agency to fall apart. And like, of course I don't want Don to have to be a fugitive of the state. But it's like, but if he gets arrested, that kind of clears some problems for me. But with Roger, it's a little bit more clear cut though, where it's just like, of course I don't want to scandalize Joan and get everyone in the office talking and ruin my marriage. But if we get together and have this baby, I'm probably going to be a happier person than I've ever been. It's like, it's all this stuff of like, of course I don't want all this stuff to happen. But if it did, there's a part of them, everybody, even with Dawn, of course.
I'm not with you on any of this. No.
Well, you don't have to be, but I'm just saying, I feel like Dawn is like, of course I don't want to, ruin everything. But what's interesting with him is that, like, I feel like, obviously in season 1, he was willing to drop everything to run the California with Rachel. But now that he's divorced and kind of aware of the consequences of, like his life falling apart, it seems like maybe that's why this is hitting him a little bit harder, is because like or it's not that he can't, but he just doesn't really want to like start anew in some respects. I think maybe a part of him is like, oh, that's a way I can kind of get out of this scot-free, but it's also like, then I'm going to have to abandon my kids. I'm going to be repeating the cycle that I did before. I'm going to have to like rebuild from scratch, all this stuff. And it's like, it's not like Dawn in season 2 where he's just like, lolly daw, I'm in California. Maybe this is my life now. It's like, oh, this isn't fun if I ruin everything.
It could, because this is definitely a different set of circumstances for the guy. I think that he has said multiple times at this point, he wants to build something. He has put a lot of work. Like, he's more than just a partner now, even. I mean, he's a co-founder. Like, he is the kind of brains of this operation. I think that he is kind of what makes this agency tick. I think that he's kind of being ridiculous when he even suggests that him leaving would be okay. Like, no, this season has emphasized multiple times that the only reason they're afloat is because these clients are taking a chance on Sterling Cooper Draper Price, which is very small, on the mystique, the kind of acclaim of Don Draper. If you take that away, then they fall apart almost instantly. It doesn't matter, they're just not in a place of solvency in that respect. And I think that, yeah, he's just in a different place. I also think that maybe he was more tempted with Rachel, just for the fact that I think that he had a stronger connection with Rachel than any of his other paramours over the series. I think that was always kind of set up in a certain way. And even compared to Faye, who I think that he's kind of starting to, you're seeing sort of like specks of disillusionment from both of them. For her last episode, it was the stuff with his kids. For him in this episode, it's the sort of like, do I really want to be with somebody who not just knows me, but has the psychological tools to dismantle me? I think that he's kind of starting to, figure out that might not be what he wants.
Something I didn't even realize until now is that like nearly all of his previous love interests have been brunettes. And like, obviously Anna Camp's character.
We've talked about this.
Yeah, I know. But just like the idea of like Faye being like, I'm a mature, responsible person. and I don't care about your biggest secret. And he's just like, yeah, but you're blonde. And then he sees
he's kind of like looking
sees,
behind her. He's like, is this real blonde or
right? And then he looks at Megan and it's just like, oh, I'm brunette, I see.
But then he looks back at Faye and he's like, well, she is Jewish, but oh, Don. So I did want to point out something because we kind of touched on the Joan stuff, but one cool thing from the commentaries about that whole scene where Joan is at the abortion clinic, you'll notice that you don't really see her and that other woman in the same shot or frame together. And that's because they did reshoots. And so the conversation completely changed apparently. So when all the scenes that show Joan speaking are, I think, were like months before all the stuff with the woman speaking. So I thought that was like a fun little touch that I definitely wouldn't have even noticed.
Did they say what was changed at all?
So it's funny because Kartheiser was trying to get that out of Christina Hendricks, and she was being kind of cagey about it. She was kind of being like she wouldn't really answer the question, and he was kind of like, "You don't have to tell me, I guess, if you don't want." And she was like, "I think Matthew Weiner, he wanted to be a little different." I think that there's like a little bit of an undertone that apparently Weiner was maybe being an asshole or something to that actor, but that's just my read of it. I could be completely off. I don't want to slander anybody. That's how it comes across. It's like apparently he had an issue with her and it was contentious.
Yeah, I don't know. I just didn't know if like maybe there was something a little bit more, I don't know, like regressive about like the mom talking about her daughter or something. I don't know. I just didn't know. Like
I could see that.
The I don't know. Just like maybe the
tone
of it
might have been
right.
off.
Right. Yeah.
I think that Hendricks said it was the performance, the way that she handled it, and kind of hints that maybe Weiner changed a little bit of the dialogue too, or the way that it was kind of performed. Yeah. And then that kind of speaks to the final product.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was just like her performance was the wrong tone and just felt off, but Christina Hendricks maybe didn't want to put that, actress under the bus, throw her under the bus or something. I don't know. It's
right,
hard to
exactly.
Say yeah.
I don't have a lot of trivia left for this one, but one cool thing I thought was when Betty is being interviewed by the G-Men, the questions they ask her are straight from the real thing. Those are real questions that they would ask back in the day. So that is authentic. And the Playboy stuff was very authentic. Playboy itself actually sent the show like very specific, like period accurate posters and paraphernalia and things to kind of match so that it was as authentic as possible. So at least compared to the Beatles, there was a more sort of, a healthy sort of relationship between the two. I didn't want to bring up with the Betty stuff because I guess we didn't really talk about that much, but
yeah, I did want to talk about that. I'm glad you did, but I do. Before you move away from it, want to say that I did think it's funny that they do incorporate the Playboy stuff because around this time, if I recall correctly, NBC was like trying to do like their answer to Mad Men with like a show. I think it was called the Playboy Club, where it was like kind of about
I think I know what you're talking about.
It was like a period piece that was like kind of about like the making of Playboy, and I think it was like a really really like hyped up show, but I think it just got mediocre reviews and got canceled after like a season or something. But it was like probably around the same time, so I think it's just funny that like Mad Men kind of rubbed in their face intentionally or not by being like, we could put Playboy in our show too.
That'd be funny. Yeah, and I do appreciate that. At least with the way they handled the Playboy stuff. And there was another piece of trivia I was going to bring up about that, but I think it kind of slipped away from my mind. So go ahead and go to what you wanted to say about Betty, because I was curious why you thought that she ended up protecting Dawn in this instance.
I took it as it would be more detrimental than beneficial on her part to expose Dawn, because that only really, I think, puts her at risk. Because, like, if she just is like, oh, I don't know, I didn't trust Dawn, like, I don't think that they're going to be like, oh, I'm so sorry, like, we're going to get this. It's going to be like, well, why were you hiding this? Or, like, why didn't you tell us earlier or whatever? And I don't, like, I think, doesn't Betty at one point say, like, I didn't have a choice or something along those lines? Like, I think, kind of just basically alludes to the fact that, Dawn, I mean, he didn't do intentionally with, as far as like bringing the FBI to her place, but he kind of put her in like a no-win scenario with this whole thing. Like it's not like she can really, work her way out of it. What I think is more interesting is that she doesn't say anything to her husband, who, if this were to leak out or become public, someone who is like a budding politician, that would be way more detrimental to his career. And, I think that's what's really fascinating. It's like their conversation in bed, and especially because he caps it with like the "no more secrets between us, babe," or something like that. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. They mentioned that in the commentary. It's like she doesn't want a scandal. She's married to a politician. She just wants this to go away. And I think that she also kind of sees that Don is her kid's father, and she knows this is the path of least resistance. And it's complicated. It's one of those things, like she and Pete react a certain way, and you can read a lot of different things into it. And on that note, we gotta actually finish out with the Roger thing, because we didn't talk about the specific conversation he has with Lee Gardner Jr., who has been the nemesis of this season. And I think that if you look at this season as a whole, I kind of disagree with the critical sort of complaints, the criticisms people have been putting out, that like, what's the overarching? Well, the overarching thing is that this agency is like one bad day away from falling apart. And this is that bad day. We now have a timer that Roger has 1 month to try to make up for Lucky Strike going away, which I think is like $20 to $25 million in billings. And they just lost North American Aviation, which is $4 million. Right. So they are in a really rough spot. And Roger decides to make an executive decision and do nothing, as he once said about the way that Harry handled the Sal thing. So that thumbs up he gives in the meeting, chewing out Pete. This is a huge low point for Roger in a lot of ways. With abortion too. This is not a great Roger episode if you're a big fan. And
my man is down bad in this episode, I have to say.
Lucky Strike moving to BBDO, and the reason that they do it, the consolidation, is something that is very, very common in the advertising world. And it is also like a specific thing that they put in the show, the way that him picking up the check is like, that was the doom. That was the sort of like, yep, that's how you know that's what the consultant was saying. It's like, that's how you know that something's wrong and that this is it. And so Roger's acting, he like goes through the 5 stages of grief, honestly. Anger, bargaining, acceptance. It's pretty messed up that he has all of this animosity towards Lee Gardner Jr. He's so pissed off, and in the end he says thank you and shakes his hand, even though this guy just really screwed him over after 30 years working together. Pretty messed up.
He invited him to his wedding.
His daughter's wedding. He doesn't know how the invitation got lost. When I've watched that, I've been like, oh yeah, because he didn't really invite him, but he like got shamed for it, right? I'm like, oh no, I meant it. But Weiner says that apparently he did, but it got messed up. That's his thinking of it. I'm like, I know, Weiner, you write this stuff and you're the creator, but I don't know. I don't read the scene that way, me personally.
But is that like what you said? I think is proven right, because he throws the same line when he's on the phone with the Bewitched couple, where he's like, I must have been out of town when that happened. Like he says something.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Roger. Yeah, exactly. It was an oversight. I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. I don't remember what I was going to bring. One other thing up, and I totally forgot. I'm so sorry, Will Ashton. I let you down.
Well, if you remember, you're the editor of this episode, so you can throw it in at the end and be like, I can
splice it in. Yeah. And then I could be like, oh, your audio got messed up, Will, but I'll repeat it for the listeners. Will just said that I'm always right. That's weird.
I thought you were going to say, you were going to like incorporate some AI where it's just like, wow, John, that's great. And I love you. And you're like, oh,
you are
Will,
so
that's so
handsome.
Nice. You are so handsome.
I think that's a good note to end it on for this week's episode of Mad Men. Next week, we are going to be talking about Chinese Wall, which is the 11th episode. We're getting close to the end of season 4. We've been zipping through it. And Chinese Wall, that's something that was brought up in the last episode in Beautiful Girls, Will, if you recall that concept. So keep that in mind. Yeah.
Cool.
Hopefully, Michael Overholtz will be back, and we'll do our best. I'm going to be traveling, though, so it might be a while before we record, but we'll figure it out. Thanks, as always, for listening.
Bye, everybody.